I invite you to please join me now as we enter into our time of meditation. And we start this time of meditation by just beginning to calm the body and just allow our breath to flow naturally. Letting any thoughts and worries go, also calming the mind. Just gently breathing in and breathing out. Nothing but this moment. And we begin today by bringing in awareness. An awareness of what it means and what it feels like to become a beacon of peace in this world. To live from that beacon of peace that we are, our natural state of peace. What does that peace feel like to you? Is it in the form of nonviolence, perhaps? Standing strong from that place of nonviolence to all other living beings and to yourself? Striving to overcome violence in ourselves and our thoughts and our words and our actions. Recognizing the power of our thoughts. Allowing us to overcome anything that doesn't serve ourselves and our highest good. Replacing those things with those things that do support our highest good. Reacting to injustice with solutions and positive responses. Managing our communications and our thoughts with skill and tact and love. Building those communities of support that overcome violence, and realizing that we transform our own inner landscape. Transforming any and all aggression in our world. Now I invite you to begin to think about respect and what respect means and what respect feels like. Showing respect and consideration for people all around us, no matter their age, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, or positions in life. Acknowledging that everyone we come in contact with receives our thoughtful consideration. knowing that we show respect by being reliable and trustworthy and by generously honoring others. Noticing that mutual respect that is increasing all around us. Also respecting the earth and nature for all it gives to support our lives. Respecting the divine spirit of life and respecting that balance in all of our interactions with people and with this planet. So as we prepare to enter into our moment of silence, I invite you to bring these things forth, to bring forth nonviolence and respect, and to feel those things, to really feel them from your core, and to radiate them out into the world as we enter into our time together of silence. And as we begin to bring our awareness back to this time and this place, we acknowledge the oneness in everyone and everything. We acknowledge that we are the healing. We are the healing at the deepest level, the healing that is so needed right here and right now. The healing that is so needed in the world. We are that. We are that light. We bring that peace, we bring that nonviolence, and we bring that respect as a part of that light. And we allow it to shine brightly because that light is who and what we are. And so it is on this wonderful day and in this wonderful moment. Namaste. And I say we continue to let those lights. Fine, Pete. I want to hire that guy the next time I need a DJ. He had it going too. I mean, he had his prayer beads hung there. I mean, and Pete, I think he told me he did all of that himself, didn't he? He recorded all that with his voice. Yeah, that was awesome. He was good. Yeah. So how's everybody feeling today? Everybody still enjoying the book and been having some moments to practice lately? It's one of the things I like so much about this book, and even just like my small study group. We've been talking about ways in which we're practicing this. So I think it's been a really good book for all of us, especially with the way things have seemed a little bit this year. And I say seemed because we remember that although things might seem a little bumpy, they're eventually going to smooth out again. Because sometimes we have to go through some of those bumps to get back to the smooth areas, right? I will say, though, that I wish I had read these chapters before I had a conversation with someone last week. Because we're getting to practice a little bit, but I'm personally practicing a little bit after I read each chapter. So I need to probably start reading the chapters earlier in the week, and I'll tell you about it. So the other day I was having a conversation with somebody, and the conversation was covering a wide variety of topics, but one of the largest topics we were talking about was, what a group of people that is marginalized right now. It was one of the main subjects, and I was told, okay, what's going on with those people doesn't affect you personally. So you just need to go on with your own life and just be happy. And I was asked if I was happy with my own life, and I was like, well, yeah. And this person's like, well, that should be enough. How dare I not bask in my privilege, right? The nerve of me, trying to care for other people. That's kind of the way I felt and kind of the direction it started going. And I got reactive with it. Luckily this conversation was via text, which helps a little bit, right? But I'll admit that these feelings of anger that were stirring up in me, I didn't use any of those lessons that we learned in our study of Gandhi's The Gift of Anger. Because if you're not conscious of it, you kind of just forget about it, and it just kind of goes out the window. But I used my anger in a little bit of a non-constructive way in this conversation, and I doubt the other person had any kind of a mind change by the end of the conversation. Luckily it was via text, which isn't really a constructive way to have conversation anyhow. But you'd think that a conversation by text would have given me time to think before I reacted, but it didn't, at least not in this case. So has anybody else ever done that? You have this conversation, you start to feel these emotions start to well up inside of you, and you just react. We forget everything we've learned, and we just goes out the window. You're going, and you're going about it. You start going, and it feels kind of cruddy, yet it feels good at the same time, to be reactive sometimes. But Pema refers to this type of behavior as getting hooked. She mentions getting hooked. And she says when we get hooked, we get really angry, resentful, fearful, or selfish. We start to go a little unconscious. We lose our payu, which is our awareness of what we're doing with our body, our speech, and our mind. So in this state, it's all too easy to begin to allow ourselves to just spiral downward a little bit. And she mentions the first step in pulling yourself up is to notice and to acknowledge when you're starting to go unconscious. She says without doing that, nothing can get better for you. How could you change anything if you're not aware of what's going on? Now, I first read this and I began to think about how difficult it can be to realize when you're unconscious. And my sister once shared a time with me where she'd been told that she exhibited some behavior right after surgery. And her husband, my brother-in-law, is in the Navy, and he used to deploy for really long periods of time, leaving my sister alone for like months on end. And at one point while he was gone, she ended up having to have emergency surgery. And the Navy wouldn't let him come home to be with her during that surgery. So she was, understandably upset. And she was told by some of the nurses after her surgery that she'd behaved a little bit erratically coming out of the anesthesia. She was told that she was cursing everybody. She was cursing the government. She was cursing the Navy. She was cursing my brother-in-law's, commanders. And she was also told by several of the nurses that she was giving everybody in the hallway a one-fingered salute. But this has been several years ago, and she still doesn't have any recollection of doing it, but she was basically still unconscious at the time. Her eyes were awake and everything, but she was unconscious. And I thought about this when I read this section of the book. It took me back to that story of her, but how can we become conscious when we are unconscious? Sounds like the two just don't go together, like oil and water. But maybe we can't necessarily stop the effects of anesthesia when it wears off, but during normal circumstances, we can start to pay attention to signs that we may be about to go unconscious. Now, I think probably most of us in here have been in situations that make us feel as if we're starting to go unconscious. Maybe it's, certain topics, like we talk about politics with people, and we're like, okay, I know that that's a subject that can make me start to go unconscious and start to go a little reactive. Maybe it's any topic that you find yourself feeling passionate about. You know that topic has a tendency to make you start to go unconscious, where you just react and you forget all of these teachings that we hear every Sunday and these teachings that we practice on a regular basis. You know that going into that conversation, you're likely to have some kind of a reaction. At least I know this is true for me. But I knew that conversation I was telling you about earlier, I knew that those topics were something that had the potential to make me go unconscious. I knew it was one of those that could definitely make me get hooked, as Pema states, and made me maybe start reacting from places of anger and just feeling those strong emotions that come with that topic. She says this about getting hooked. She says, when you get hooked, you lose your sense of everyone having the same vulnerability, of everyone holding the same desire to have happiness and to avoid pain. You find yourself cut off from the human condition in a state where things don't touch you. So we can begin to see that there's a little bit of a fine line here. There's a line where we juggle the need to avoid going unconscious, yet still staying aware of those things that we remain passionate about. We can also go unconscious in a way that we just stop thinking about it altogether. I could have just said, okay, yeah, I'm happy with my life, and stop thinking about, caring for other people or making sure other people have the same rights. I could just say, yeah, I'm happy, forget it. I'm going to live in my bubble. We can also go into the mode of just pretending it doesn't exist. The whole, what I like to refer to as the rainbows and unicorns method, or what can also be called toxic positivity. Oh, those immigrant children that are separated from parents that we can't find, I just can't think about that. That's really painful. I can't think about that. That's somehow their own fault, maybe. I'm just going to sit over here and I'm going to sing my tunes from Mary Poppins, and I'm just going to pretend that it doesn't exist in my world. As an example of the rainbows and unicorns, that whole toxic positivity. And we can go into the mode of losing heart, as Pema says, losing our ability to discern the basic goodness in people. This can lead to discouragement in both ourselves and others, though, when we start to do that. And the results of going unconscious, they can be pretty huge, right? They can be life-impacting, not just for ourselves, but for other people. What if Gandhi had gone unconscious? Or Jesus? The Buddha? Current-day spiritual teachers, what if they decide to just go unconscious and just pretend like it doesn't exist? And it could be easy for a lot of us to do right now. Heck, probably a lot of us just kind of want to at this point in time. So many people feeling like 2020 has just dragged them through the mud. We've got COVID, we've got the election year, we've got the rise of hate groups, we've got divisive so-called leaders that feed these hate groups, that fuel the need for these hate groups' fires to continue to grow. Separation from our families and our friends, and even a good portion of our Unity of Madison community. We're all separated right now. And it would be really easy to just say, forget it. I'm just going to throw in the towel and I'm going to go unconscious right now. To just say I've had enough, and to just go home and curl up with a good book and just close out the outside world. Although I still recommend curling up with a good book occasionally. It's good self-care and good medicine. But Pema mentions, 9/11 in the book. We all saw it. And I don't think there's anybody in this room or probably watching online that doesn't remember that day. Exactly what you were doing on that day and what you were doing the moment you heard about it happening on that day. Certainly it was a tragic moment, but there was also some beauty found within. People were becoming conscious in ways that perhaps they hadn't been conscious in a very long time. People were helping each other. People were showing love to each other. People were coming together and showing kindness in ways that they may not have, in years prior to that event happening. But after a while, like with most things, the consciousness started to wear off, and people were once again growing unconscious. Pema mentions a cartoon that she saw in the New Yorker where one woman says to another, "It's hard, but slowly I'm getting back to hating everyone." Now I felt a bit better about my own times of unconsciousness when I read that Pema still experiences them too. I'm like, she's a Buddhist nun and she's in her 80s and she still goes unconscious too. So it made me feel a little bit better about my own journey and my own experiences. But she mentions that she grows excited when she realizes that she's closing down, because she knows that in that moment, she's got the perfect opportunity to pull herself right back up. She talks about putting things into a bigger context. And sometimes this ends up forced on us, right? Sometimes we don't have a choice to become conscious. She talks about a man that she knew who enjoyed staying in victim mode. One of his favorite questions was when something would go wrong in his life was the dreaded, "Why me? Oh, me again. Why does this keep happening to me?" And this went on until this man one day received a terminal cancer diagnosis. And he realized within that moment, she said it was like the flip of a light switch. He realized in that moment that life here is way too short to be focused on victimhood. But oftentimes we're not forced into it. Sometimes we have to spend time really working on it and developing compassion. And she tells the story of a friend of hers who's in prison and how one specific guard, Pema's friend would tell her that this one specific guard liked to taunt him. He'd like to taunt him and try to get a reaction out of him, but the inmate, refused to take the bait. And his friends asked him how he does this. He's like, "Hey, is it that Buddhist stuff that you're practicing?" And the man's like, "No." He mentioned how through dialogue at one point, he found that often these guards have really bad days. These prison guards have really bad days, and that they go home and they take it out on their families. And he told himself, he goes, "I don't want to feed into that." He decided to instead have compassion for that guard that acts out and to not take the bait. And by doing this, he's placing everything into a larger context. And he's beginning to think about the wider consequences and how through those consequences, he can either play into causing pain for someone other than himself or not. And it really becomes a matter of being conscious and starting to think more about the big picture and the role that each one of us plays in that big picture. So remember polarization. We've talked about that. And then remember the exercise of just like me. Just like me, other people want to be happy. Just like me, other people want to feel loved. Just like me, other people want to feel secure. We also want to realize about how everything that we do matters. Me throwing a piece of garbage out the window, car window, it might not matter so much today. But what about when I do it again tomorrow? And when I do it again the next day and then the next? It starts to add up over time and it starts to litter the streets. It begins to blow into other people's yards, and it can cause harm to wildlife, to our water sources. The ramifications start to impact people other than just myself. Now, Pema also mentions vulnerability. She says if we allow ourselves to feel vulnerability, if we sit up tall when we want to collapse and we refrain from striking out when we're provoked, we are having a positive effect on the larger world. Maintaining our own confidence and well-being benefits our family, our workplace, and everyone we communicate with. Happiness is contagious. But it also requires something else. We must be willing to move beyond our comfort zones. That nice warm spot that you have on the couch, that favorite spot at home or in your favorite chair, that place where you like to curl up in your favorite blanket, just stay kind of nice and warm, you feel secure, and You just kind of block out the outside world. That outside world that's out there outside of your safety bubble. But you're going to have to be willing to leave it. Deciding to go home and throw on some Netflix and block everything else, you're going to have to be willing to leave that, at least occasionally. So Pema asked this question, when things are really tough, like when you're scared, lonely, angry, feel like everything's falling apart, in difficult times, in what do you take refuge? So it's only natural to want to hunker down and to feel safe during times like what we're experiencing now. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to feel safe and secure? It's likely not the only one. I'm likely not the only one of us that has thought about leaving the country since the end of 2016. But what is that going to solve? Pema mentions something called the 3 jewels. Now, this is a place where Buddhist practitioners speak of taking refuge. One is the Buddha, which is the role model, the inspiration. The second is the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha and others who have experienced such an awakening. And the third is the Sangha, the communities of people who are on the same path of awakening. So Pema asked some of her students. She asked if they were practicing or seeking the 3 jewels when seeking refuge. Many admitted that they weren't. These are Buddhist students, and they admitted that they weren't. They were instead going for the easiest, least path of resistance. Sounds a little bit like me sometimes, but anyway. But Pema goes on to talk about the first time she heard the phrase welcoming the unwelcome. And it was during a time she discovered a model that outlines the process of growth. Now, there's an illustration in our book, but the model consists of 3 parts, and the illustration in the book shows a circle. The innermost part of the circle is your comfort zone. That's where you feel all nice and warm, cuddling up, watching the Netflix. The next layer is the learning, and that's the challenge zone. This is where we decide we're going to venture out a little bit. We're going to move from that comfort zone into the learning zone. And we may not feel altogether safe when we move into that learning zone because we're stepping out of that comfort zone. It's something a little bit different. It's taken a little bit of bravery here. We're starting to test the limits when we do this. Maybe you want to start doing some public speaking, so instead of going all out, maybe you just stand in front of people and you just say a word or two, kind of dipping the toe into the learning zone there. You allow yourself to feel all of the nervousness that comes with it, yet you begin to realize you're like, wait a second, I survived. I'm still here. So maybe the next time you step into that learning zone and you do just a little bit more and so forth. The learning zone is where we begin to grow. Then the outer layer of the illustration is where the excessive risk zone is situated. We're going from comfort to learning to this excessive risk zone. And it starts to get real in that zone. This is where it starts to get very, very interesting and honestly, possibly too much for most of us. Pema likens it to jumping directly into the deep end of the swimming pool when you don't know how to swim. And that doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me. I know some people that would probably try it, but not this guy. But you're just not ready, and you can sometimes find it really traumatizing when you move into this excessive risk zone. This zone is like jumping from your comfort zone. You're skipping directly over to the learning zone, and you're going straight for the gusto. No padding in between. She suggests, though, that it's usually best to move a bit more slowly than that. So starting in the comfort zone and then moving to the learning zone and then perhaps delving into that excessive risk zone. But sometimes we're forced out of our comfort zones, aren't we? Because they begin to shrink in on us. Josie read that in the beginning of the second spiritual reading about sometimes our comfort zone starts to shrink in on us. Sometimes there becomes a moment when we have no choice but to move out of that learning zone because we just can't stay in it anymore. Some of the things that are going on around us, the Black Lives Matter, all of this stuff, racism, this stuff's boiling to the surface. We're having to step out of those places of privilege from that comfort zone out into this learning zone. Perhaps a place that none of us have ever been before, but it has to happen because it's gotten too small in that comfort zone. We can't stand there any longer. But of course, we're different with our paces and our reasonings, right? My learning zone might be your risk zone and vice versa. All of our zones are personal to each and every one of us, and we all have to move through them in our own pace and our own personal ways. And we may even sometimes have to move backwards, for our own self-care. Maybe I've delved into the learning zone and I need to go back into my comfort zone for a little while to kind of rejuvenate and refuel myself. But it doesn't mean we need to start over just because we do that. It may just mean that we need to remove ourselves a bit from the outside world, just kind of move inward for a minute. Just curl up in front of the couch with that book or Netflix, which I recommend doing. Minnie and I have started watching this it's an older show, but it's called Ozark. It's a little dark, but it's a good show, so just recommending it on Netflix. And I didn't get paid to add that plug, I just did. I wish I got paid for it, but I didn't. But anyway. But in the end, it all becomes about how we want to live our lives and to the contributions that we choose to make in this world. Those contributions to possibly help enrich both our own lives and the lives of others. It becomes up to us as to whether or not we choose to sit comfortably in that comfort zone till maybe we're forced out or not, or to sit comfortably in that learning zone, seldom if ever, or in that comfort zone, seldom if ever moving into that learning zone, and possibly even beyond. So back to the beginning of my talk, I could look around at my own life and realize that, I've got a great job here. I've got a roof over my head. I've got food on my table. I've got an amazing life partner, amazing friends. I could look at that stuff and say, sure, I'm happy in life. And I'm grateful for those things. And yeah, sure, I'm happy in life, but for me, that's just not enough. Others matter to me too. And they probably should, or I'm probably likely in the wrong career field, I would say. But that was one of the reasons that my corporate jobs never really fed my soul. I felt like I needed to do something to help other people. Having that nice paycheck for myself just wasn't enough. So there's something I want to share in the book, and if you want to look at it too when you get home, I'm starting on the bottom of page 64, and Pema says, "Did I step out into groundlessness and truly take refuge in the three jewels? Did I lighten up and loosen up, or did I hunker down in my armor and try to maintain the status quo? Status quo is not very helpful for spiritual growth, for using this short interval between birth and death." So I look at myself, and I ask myself, do you enjoy status quo? Nah, I never did abide by the status quo, and I'm not going to do it now. To me, there are way too many other important things to do. Namaste. All right, everybody. And we had a board meeting